If I am guilty of anything, it is a simple pursuit of knowledge. That was said by Magnus the Red. Hello, and welcome back to the Wisdom Warhammer channel, and in today's video, I'll be going over the history and structure of the Thousand Sons. I will go over their time during the Great Crusade before Magnus was found, and then their time during the Great Crusade after Magnus was found. Then, I will go over their time during the Horus Heresy, and at the end I will go over the 15th Legion's structure. Like in my previous videos, I do not own the artwork in the video, and all things Warhammer are owned by Games Workshop and Black Library. So, with the intro out of the way, let's get the video started, shall we? Now, like the other legions, the Thousand Sons would start their service during the final years of the Unification Wars on Terra. When the Legion was formed, there was a series of warp storms that racked the Sol system by Luna and on Terra. During this time, there was a massive psychic events that caused pockets of madness, suicide, and murder. This was strange considering that the Thousand Sons Legion was being formed and gene seed implantation was underway and no one batted an eye. But when Magnus heard of these warp storms, he saw it as a bad omen, and when the legionaries came off the surgery tables, they seemed fine. Now, the 15th was a unique military force. They were scholars first and warriors second, and all of them were psychically gifted. The recruits were drawn from the former lands of the Achaemenid Empire, and all were selected by the Emperor himself, which was surprising because he never did that to the other legions. The Emperor looked at the noble families of these lands and would choose the boys that showed psychic potential. For example, Azek Ehrman and his twin brother Azomazund Ehrman. Now, when these student aspirants were ready, the Emperor would bring them to his labs in the mountains of the Himalaya. When these powerful scholar warriors were ready, the Emperor ordered them to bring a few pockets of the remaining resistance on Terra into the Imperium. The only battle we have records of during the 15th Legion's time in the Unification Wars was the Battle of Boeotia, which was ruled by a monarchy. This monarchy was called the Iselti, and they tried diplomacy for 150 years before the Emperor sent the 15th Legion and a force of Imperial Guard to bring this piece of land into the Imperium. I assume after this campaign they would fight in small skirmishes throughout the wastelands of Terra. Then, when they were ready, they would be sent into the stars and fight in the beginning stages of the Great Crusade in the Sol system. After 5 years of service, the legionaries of the 15th Legion would start to show signs of psychic power, and from this they would also show signs of mutations. This disease was called the flesh change, and the first case of it would be shown during the compliance of Bizat. When the first case popped up, it spread quickly, and to save the Legion, the worst legionaries that showed signs were put into stasis to prevent their bodies from changing. To possibly prevent the disease, the lesser at-risk Marines would meditate or use retrovials, alchemy, and or sheer willpower to prevent the flesh change. It was so bad that the 15th Legion was near extinction, but thankfully the Primarch Magnus the Red was found on the sorcerer world of Prospero. As the 15th Legion reunited with their father on Prospero, planet of the sorcerers, they would be arranged in ranks before their father as Magnus talked to the Emperor. After the Emperor left, the Thousand Sons would learn from Magnus and the sorcerer orders of Prospero, and everything was good for a while. Then, the entire Legion showed severe signs of the flesh change, and seeing the dire situation, Magnus made a deal with a being in the warp named Coronazone, the Dweller in the Abyss, and the Demon of Dispersion. After this event, the Legion would be numbered at barely 1,000 legionaries, but the flesh change was gone with no trace of it. From this rebirth, the 15th Legion was restructured and began to flourish during their time on Prospero, as well as growing their psychic power. The new legionaries of the Thousand Sons Legion were Prosperan, and they were pretty powerful and knowledgeable. For example, Amon, who was the adoptive father of Magnus. The city that the Legion was staying in was named Tisca, which was known as the City of Light, and this place was the pinnacle of psychic power in the Imperium. When the 15th Legion would return to the Great Crusade with a Primarch at its head, they would be a force of psychic might, and they would bring a lot of worlds into the Imperium. But the 15th Legion were scholars first, and they would run excavations of ancient ruins upon worlds they conquered. Also, they would learn all the knowledge they could from the civilizations that they encountered. During a majority of the Great Crusade, they would use their psychic powers that would enhance them during combat and would have different orders that specialized in different magics. Even though they were not a big legion, they would bring a lot of worlds into compliance and would destroy their opponents using the power of the Great Ocean, which was the warp. But with this kind of power, they would draw the wrong eyes upon them. The ones that had their eyes on the Crimson King and his 1,000 sons were the Pale King Mortarion and the Wolf King Leman Russ. The Wolf King had more of a rivalry against Magnus, and it came to a head when the two legions would do a joint campaign called the Arc-Reach Cluster Campaign. But before this campaign, the 1,000 Sons and their Primarch were on a planet called the Garu, which was a dead world that held a dark secret. When the 1,000 Sons Legion arrived, they would learn that the human empire that was there told legends that the ancient Xenos race called the Elohim ruled this world. The Elohim were possibly the Eldar, but a different name, and the legends say that the Elohim were consumed by the Diastatai, which are demons. Obviously, the Eldar here were consumed by Slaanesh demons, but these demons were imprisoned until the Crimson King and his sons released them. Under the surface, the 15th had found a web-like network that was corrupted, which was tampered with, and this would unleash the demons. The demons had possessed the Revenant Titans and began to fight Magnus and his sons alongside a great company of space wolves. The battle was hard and long, but the demons were banished, and after everything calmed down, the Legion would join the Wolf King and the Urizen and their legions in the Arc-Reach Cluster. During this campaign, it began slowly and was punishing for the Imperials, but the 1,000 Sons would then quickly destroy the enemy force with ease. Eventually, the Imperial forces would all descend upon the main world, and here the tension between the Space Wolves and the 1,000 Sons exploded. Here is what happened. During the battle, the Space Wolves were destroying the libraries, which angered and saddened the 15th Legion. The boiling point happened when the Flesh Change returned, and the first case was a legionary named Hastor. Magnus tried to save his son, but failed because the Wolf King had put the legionary out of his misery. As the Crimson King and his sons faced the Wolf King and his wolves, who were about ready to fight, but thankfully Lorgar had convinced both the legions to not fight, and before the Wolf King left, he threatened his brother Magnus. Shortly after the Arc-Reach Cluster campaign, the Council of Nicaea would happen, which involved the Emperor and a decent number of the Primarchs. The Council was to debate the usage of psychic powers within the legions and the Imperium, and Magnus was the main leader of being pro-Psyker and the Pale King Mortarion being anti-Psyker. During the debate, Azek Ahriman would speak for the usage of warp-based powers, and then Magnus would speak, and he was convincing. Sadly, this failed because the Emperor had decreed that the usage of psychic powers would be banned, and those who would violate his decree would be labeled as traitors. After the Council of Nicaea, the 1,000 Sons returned to the Great Crusade, weakened due to the edict, but they would still collect knowledge and do research, which was forbidden by the Emperor. Eventually, the Crimson King and a decent number of his legion returned to the planet of the Sorcerers to study the texts they had gathered throughout the decades in the Great Crusade. They would still use their psychic powers in the shadows while on Prospero, and during their time researching, something dark was on the horizon. But before I go into the 1,000 Sons' time during the Horus Heresy, I will now go over some of the notable campaigns during the Great Crusade. Starting off with the Arcandian Defiance, and it was one of their first engagements, and it was on the planet of Castitus. The Imperial forces numbered around 50,000 Sons, legionaries, and 2,000 Imperial Guardsmen, and it was a short battle. The 15th Legion Marines would do most of the fighting against the rebels upon Castus, while the Imperial Guard assisted and eventually the rebels were defeated. Going into more detail about the Battle of Bazat, it involved the 2nd and 5th chapters of the Thousand Suns. They would fight against a bunch of barbarians that worshipped the sun and used psychic powers against the Imperial forces. The first legionary that fell to the flesh change is unknown, but he was named Deleth, and this word's meaning is unknown. Now, this next battle was a joint battle between the Thousand Suns and the Night Lords, and both legions were being led by their primarchs. The Night Haunter and the Night Lords had killed 10% of the population through terror operations, and during their operations, Kurz ordered the destruction of the Tower of Zoa, which held a lot of ancient texts of the civilization that was on this planet. Magnus and his sons put up a psychic shield to prevent the destruction of the tower, and Kurz did say that he didn't care if he killed 1,000 suns and the planet, he only wanted to destroy that tower. Magnus, seeing no sense in dying for the tower, he ordered his sons to drop the shield, which would destroy the tower, and after the battle, the two legions would not fight alongside each other for the remainder of the Great Crusade. Now, there was a battle that the Thousand Suns fought in alongside the Emperor, and it was named the Kamika Toroika. This battle was against a Greenskin Wa in the 15th Legion, and their primarch would be assisted by a Titan Legion by the name of Legio Astruum, and a small force of Pan-Pac Eugenians, which was an Imperial Guard regiment originally from Terra. During this battle, the Imperial casualties were very high, which included a large portion of the Legio Astruum Titans being taken down. But the Thousand Suns and their allies had won after 2 years of hard fighting, and to honor the Legio, the 15th would take a piece of the Titan named Canis Vertex and take it to Prospero. They would repair the Titan and it would be in the burning in the Prospero, but I will get to that battle in the Horus Heresy section of the video. Now, I will be mentioning the other battles that we don't have much info on, and here they are. We have the Battle of Austrasius, which was going to be a joint campaign with the 3rd and 15th Legions, but as the Thousand Suns arrived at the mustering, the ships of the 3rd left. Thankfully, the 15th Legion was able to take over the enemy territory, which was the colonies of the Sin Star. This next campaign was a joint campaign between the Thousand Suns and the Death's Graders, and both legions didn't talk to each other. When they talked, it would be either through servants or servitors, and this was called the Colagrian campaign. Now, in these next two battles, the twin brother of Azek Ehrman had led the Thousand Suns forces in these battles. We have the first battle of Necrodo, which only required 200 legionaries, and it was a compliance action, and it was completed in 6 hours. The next battle that Orzamund Ahriman led was the Compliance of Elenum, and it lasted for 500 seconds, and the Thousand Suns had only lost 3 warriors. The last battle I'll talk about is called the Turning of the Golden Apostles, and the legion was led by the Primarch himself, and the Golden Apostles was a human Xenos alliance that had proven difficult to the Imperial forces. Magnus had declared that he could and would destroy this alliance, and it required 5 circles drawn from 3 fellowships, which were the orders within the 15th. In the beginning, the Thousand Suns had struggled, but they were able to take the system from the Golden Apostles, and in 81 days the second system was under siege. Then a reinforcement force of the Alliance had arrived, but the Thousand Suns planned it to happen, and from this the entire reinforcement force was wiped out, and soon after that the Golden Apostles were no more. Now, going into the Thousand Suns time during the Horus Heresy, I will talk about that dark event that happened. This event was the wounding of the War Master upon Davin, and Magnus heard it through the warp and realized that the Chaos Gods in the warp were up to something. He found out that they were going to corrupt Horus, which would cause civil war, and to prevent it, Magnus and his most trusted sons would conduct a ritual which would allow the prevention of Horus's corruption. During this ritual, hundreds of servants would die to send the Primarch of the 15th into the warp, while his sons kept the connection secure. No one knows what happened between Magnus and his brother, but one thing was certain. He was horrified at what he saw and heard while in the warp. Magnus quickly tried to warn the Emperor, but failed, and from this event it sealed the fate of the Thousand Sons. The legion that was sent to bring doom to the planet of the sorcerers and its sons was the Wolf King and the entire Space Wolves Legion. The Wolf King was ordered to bring the Crimson King and his sons in chains to Terra, but the War Master had manipulated the orders, and from this it would be a violent battle between the two legions. At first, the Thousand Sons didn't know that the Space Wolves were on the way to punish the 15th because their father had put up a barrier around the world. Their father locked himself in his chambers on Tisca, and one of the high-ranking Thousand Sons Marines went to tell his father about the approaching fleet. He was burned in his armor. Then, when the Thousand Sons Legion realized that the Space Wolves were about to invade Prospero, they prepared for war. When the battle began, the Space Wolves were on top until the Thousand Sons began to use their psychic power, and they would start pushing back against the 6th Legion. They were doing well until the flesh change returned, and this would then cause the contingent of Custodes and Sisters of Silence to join the fight against the 15th Legion. As the Thousand Sons were pushed back to where Magnus was, their father came out of his tower to fight alongside his sons and would fight Leman Russ. As Magnus walked out and prepared to duel his brother, he gave the Book of Magnus to Azek Araman so he could protect it, and began to fight his brother. Magnus did what he could against the Wolf King while his sons fought and died around him, but eventually the Crimson King was defeated as his brother broke his spine upon his knee. As the Thousand Sons looked on in horror at the sight of their father, bloodied and beaten, Magnus spoke something, and then he and the remaining Thousand Sons disappeared into the warp. They arrived at a demon world dedicated to the Changer of Ways, and they were numbered at 1,000 Marines. When the high-ranking sorcerers of the Thousand Sons found Magnus, they saw that he was a shard. They would find shards of Magnus, and each shard held a portion of the Primarch Psyche. As time went on, the Legion would reunite with lost groups of Thousand Sons, and they would be numbered at 4,000. Now, these Thousand Sons Cabals would either find the shards of Magnus or fight the loyalists across this Imperium. Then when the Siege of Terra happened, Magnus and his sons offered their power to summon demonic reinforcements upon Terra. Then when the outer walls of the palace were destroyed, the Thousand Sons were then ordered to bring down the wards of the inner palace. As the force of Thousand Sons went deeper into the palace, the Legion would fight a force of Imperial Fists and Librarians of the Blood Angels. Then, in another part of the palace, Magnus led a force of Thousand Sons to find a shard of Magnus in the palace. When they went into the throne room, they found out that the shard was gone, and from this, Magnus and his sons had completely given themselves to the Changers of Ways Tzeentch. Magnus and his force retreated into the Webway and stayed there until Vulcan had fought and beaten the Ascended Magnus. As Magnus fought his brother, the other Cabals of the Thousand Sons fought the Loyalists until the Lion, Gilman, and Leman arrived, alongside the other Loyalist reinforcements. After the Thousand Sons retreated after the Siege of Terra, the remains of the Legion then had to deal with the widespread flesh change. After the heresy, the Thousand Sons sorcerer Azek Araman had found a way to stop the flesh change that was continuing to tear the Legion apart. Magnus had forbidden Araman from doing the spell, but his son ignored it and went behind his father. Araman and his Cabal casted the Rubric of Araman, and from this, the legionaries that were inflicted with the flesh change turned into a bunch of suits of armor. These suits of armor were filled with dust of the Thousand Sons, and they would be used on the battlefield and were controlled by Thousand Sons sorcerers who were still flesh and blood. After Magnus and the other high sorcerers found out Araman and his Cabal did this ritual, they were banished from the demon world. This was one of the major events in the Legion, and after this, the Thousand Sons would be split into different warbands led by a sorcerer. I will go over their time after the Horus Heresy in another video, but now I will go over the Thousand Sons' notable engagements during the Horus Heresy. Now, the interesting thing about the engagements at the 15th Legion that happened during the Horus Heresy was that some of them had contingents of loyalist Thousand Sons. I will talk about these battles, but I'm going to start with the Battle of Makator 7, and it started out as a joint campaign between the Imperial Fists and Thousand Sons. This happened during the Battle of Prospero, and after the Imperial Fists found out about the betrayal of the Crimson King, they would abandon their allies. Realizing that the Imperial Fists abandoned them, the Thousand Sons would be killed, and a majority of them would be veterans, and from that, 700 15th Legion Marines were killed. The Battle of Uret was mostly a Space Wolves versus Luna Wolves battle, but there were small elements of the Thousand Sons, but we don't have much info on them during this battle. Now, this next battle was a short skirmish called the Accidentarian Incident, and it was before the Thousand Sons were declared traitors. They did a surprise attack upon the garrison of Imperial Fists and a small force of Custodes, and to distract them, the Scarab Terminators would fight them. While the Loyalists were occupied with the Scarabs, they would unleash their power and push the Loyalists back. Before the counterattack happened, the Thousand Sons then grabbed the data cores that they needed and retreated before they were caught. Now, I have mentioned the Siege of Inuit, and I assume the Thousand Sons launched magical attacks against the Loyalists, while the Death Guard launched plagues, and World Eaters and Luna Wolves launched assaults upon the Ice Hives and Imperial forts. Like I said in my other videos that I mentioned the siege, the traitors would be pushed back eventually, near the end of the heresy. Now, during the Battle of Zal Arkad, it involved the Sixth Fellowship, which was a force of loyalist Thousand Sons, and they would fight a fleet of Dark Angels. The 15th Legion Marines would defend Zal Arkad, which was a forged world, and when the Dark Angels thought the Thousand Sons were traitors, they began to fight back. Not wanting another Prospero, the Thousand Sons launched psychic attacks upon the Dark Angels, who did 3 counterattacks. These attacks failed and hundreds of loyalists died to the Titans of Legio Exabiax. So the Dark Angels then retreated and blockaded the planet until the Lion gave them new orders. So essentially this battle was a battle between loyalists versus loyalists, and it was a miscommunication and mistrustful battle. Now, the next battle was another Loyalist Thousand Sons battle, and they would fight alongside a force of White Scars and Iron Hands against the Word Bearers. It was called the Raid on Paradoxion 5. This was an orbital platform that was destroyed by the Loyalist forces, and all Word Bearers were destroyed and killed. The final notable battle I will talk about is the Siege of Chthonium, and this was the last battle that I could find that had the Loyalist Thousand Sons that were under the command of Sul Kontep. They would assist the Imperial Fists and other Loyalist forces upon the adoptive homeworld of the War Master Horus, and I assume they would launch assaults against the traitors and would use their power against their former allies. Then, when the Dark Angels arrived, they would force both sides to leave or be fired upon, and the Imperial Fist commander was angered, but he would order a withdrawal. Now, we know that Sol was killed in action, but we do not know about the other Loyalist Thousand Sons, and from this, it concluded the Siege of Chthonium. Now, going into the structure of the Thousand Sons Legion during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy, we will start at the top. We have Magnus the Primarch at the top, and under him are the Rahiti, who were the coven of warlocks that advised the Primarch. The members were chosen from the elite captains of the fellowships, which were the companies of the 15th Legion. Because the Imperium waxed and waned, as did the Rahiti's psychic power, and each member was skilled in all kinds of sorcery. The Rahiti was the Crimson King's version of the Mournival, which was Horus's inner council. Then under that, we have the Scarab Occult Terminators, otherwise known as the Sekhmet or Magnus's Veterans. They were the first fellowship, which was the elite of the Legion and were bodyguards of the Primarch. The Thousand Sons Marine named Azek Araman led the fellowship, and they would answer to Araman and the Primarch. These warriors were also very powerful psychers and mastered all ways of psychic powers the 15th Legion had learned. During combat, they would fight with perfect discipline, and some of the Primarchs like Ferris and the Khan saw the Sekhmet as automata in battle. But a lot of these warriors would turn into the Rubric Marines after the Battle of Rubric of Araman was casted, which was horrifying. Now, the companies of the Thousand Sons were called fellowships, and there were 9 of these fellowships. We will start with the first fellowship, which means that they were the elite of the Legion, like I talked about a second ago, and they were called Sekhmet, and they were numbered at 9,000 legionaries. The second fellowship was made of a mixture of units from the cults and order lines, and were numbered at 7,800 legionaries. The third fellowship was numbered at 8,200, and we don't have more info about this fellowship. The fourth fellowship was numbered at 200 legionaries that were present on Prospero, and the 3,000 other legionaries of this fellowship were away on campaigns. The fifth fellowship was numbered at 6,200 legionaries, and for an unknown reason, they would be reduced in strength, which would allow them to be more effective and not be spread to different campaigns across the systems. The sixth fellowship was numbered at 4,000 legionaries, and most of them would be killed during the campaign in the surrounding sectors of Zau Arkad. The seventh fellowship was numbered at 7,200 legionaries, and they would have a similar fate to the fifth fellowship as they were reduced in strength. The eighth fellowship was numbered at 8,400 legionaries, and were reinforced by the orders of the Primarch. And the ninth fellowship was numbered at 7,900 legionaries, and were spread throughout the galaxy. Now, the very unique part of the Thousand Sons are the cults, who are experts in different kinds of psychic powers. There are 5 cults within the Legion, and I will rattle them off because they are pretty obvious. Starting with the Athenian cult, who were the masters of telepathy, and could read minds and transmit their own thoughts. The Corvidae cult were the master oracles of the Thousand Sons, who used the powers of divination and precognition, and could see the future, which helped in battles. The Pavoni were the masters of physiokinesis, which was biomancy, which means they could manipulate biological systems of their opponents and themselves, which could make them into shapeshifters. The Pyrrhae cult were the master pyromancers and could summon powerful fire spells upon the battlefield. The Raptora cult were the masters of telekinesis, which means they could rip their enemies apart with their minds and could throw objects with ease. Now, the Thousand Sons Legion did have subgroups within subgroups, and they were called the Orders, and there would be 3 orders. These order members would be throughout the Legion, and each order had specific roles, and we will start with the Order of Ruin. This order was obsessed with numbers and the structure of the hidden side of the universe, whatever that means. They were also the siege masters, planners, and logistical specialists, and knew the structure of the Legion like the back of their hand, and also would be charged with repairing the warships of the Legion. Think of them as the tech marines of the Thousand Sons Legion. Their next order was the Order of the Jackal, who were tasked with raising the next generations of the Thousand Sons Legionaries. They were the order that tended to the urns of the dead and the tombs beneath Tisca, and would also work closely with the apothecaries of the 15th. Think of them as the spiritual guardians of the Legion, and would also have a say in any legionaries that would be placed in dreadnoughts. These order members would wear jackal masks and have a sigil of a jackal upon one of their pauldrons, and were highly revered in the Legion. Now, the final order was called the Order of Blindness, or the Hidden Ones, and the rumors say that Amon, the equerry of Magnus, was the leader of this order. They were the spy masters and infiltrators of the Legion, and used their powers to manipulate regular people into doing their bidding. For example, they used a remembrancer to infiltrate the Space Wolves Legion without the man knowing. Now, the Thousand Sons did have a pretty big legion, and at their height, they would be numbered at 89,000 and 90,000 Marines. Now, the Thousand Sons would rarely deploy in massive numbers, and they would commonly have smaller detachments because the leaders of these detachments had more independence. Before the Council of Nicaea, these small detachments would work together and use their psychic powers to crush their opponents. With the usage of their power, they would be the equivalent of at least 2 companies of another legion. The fleet of the Thousand Sons was bad, but not the best either. And they had 40 capital ships and around 120 smaller ships. They had the Photep, which was the flagship of Magnus, which was armed with very powerful psychic weapons and was formidable in void warfare. Now, you may look at the Thousand Sons and say them as why they're a weak legion, but they were still very powerful in combat, and they were not to be trifled with. Now we have gotten to the end of the video on the history and structure of the Thousand Sons Legion. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did, hit the like button and send it to someone who would like this content. If you are new and would like to see more, hit the subscribe button and bell notification to be notified for when a new video comes out. If you want to see more Legion histories and structures, check out my other videos. I hope you guys have a good day, and I will see you in the next video. This is Wisdom Warhammer, signing off.